digitaljamsessions.com.
Hello and welcome to this Digital Jam session. Today we're joined once again by Mookie Kulhan, who returns to us once again. We also have back with us Phil Harris from Big Point, and a new addition to the crowd today is Alan Sott. Welcome, gang, and thanks for joining us. And as always, we'd like to ask you to explain a little bit about yourselves and what you do so that our lovely listeners can find out a little bit more about what you've been up to. I'm going to start with you, Mookie. Tell us all about what you've been doing with the likes of MTV, BBC and ITV.
Hello, everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world right now. My name is Mookie. I'm an executive digital producer. My background is in the music industry and entertainment broadcast industry with 10 years at MTV, and recently been executive digital producer with The Voice, with the BBC, and transitioning into ITV. In between the big scary projects, I work very closely with record labels and artists and management and broadcasters within the multi-platform digital production space. Apps, websites, live streaming, and within that, immersive content in 360 VR, AR, and integrated with AI has become a major vertical of mine. And integrated with everything we do, of course, is marketing, which is why I'm here today to tell you a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Mookie. And I'm going to assume that our lovely audience understand the alphabet soup that we're going to be throwing at them for the next half hour or so. So, Phil, would you care to explain what you've been up to at Big Point?
Hey, I'm Phil. I'm a narrative designer at Big Point. That's not quite a writer. It's more a sort of world builder. I think that narrative design should flow through marketing, story, art, design, and also like the coding, so that you get a whole complete like picture and you get this sort of wonderful feeling of this world and immersive like area that is surrounding you in games, in video, in TV, in anything that is multimedia.
Okay. And Alan, why don't you explain to us a little bit about what you've been up to in your wonderful magical mystery tour through Data Monitor and Foothold Technologies?
Well, I've been working as a digital marketer for my entire career. I have grown in the digital world, which brings me into more recently VR and kind of looking into that. I'm multi-channel marketing is kind of my thing. Growth marketing, Phil, I know you hate that term, but growth marketing and audience development is kind of what I work on. I love lead generation, and I see a lot of area of good for marketing people in the VR world. And that's kind of why I'm here.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all for joining us. And what I want to do is I do want to talk about this dynamic of marketing and growth hacking, which I know Phil is like cringing as I say these words, growth hacking. But
that sounds like a disease. You know?
But I do want to talk about this because it's not a conversation that enough people are having. Now, if Kathy Haxall was with us, I'm sure that we would have a really interesting, broad conversation about this. But in the context of from a TV and 360 filmmaking perspective versus a more game industry, game VR perspective, and then with Alan's kind of perspective from a marketing perspective, I kind of want to leap into this conversation because there is this whole thing around, traditionally in the TV industry, we talk about audience dev. And audience dev is generally acknowledged to be the focus around growing the audience, growing the community, growing the fandom around an IP or a property. Whereas from a games industry perspective, you're looking at, community development, and you're looking at pure marketing in terms of, pay-per-click and social media and all those traditional marketing channels, which would be more the focus from a games industry perspective. But when it comes to VR, there is this kind of missing middle gap where nobody has really started to look properly at marketing this kind of content. And so what we have is this really kind of strange hybrid, if you like, where you have a game studio who's perhaps promoting a games title and they're using the same traditional techniques and methodologies they would as if they were advertising a game. And you have a film or TV company or TV studio promoting a 360 film in the same way they would with a movie or a TV show. And both of them are missing this fundamental point about actually, this is an immersive format. It's an immersive entertainment experience. And there isn't really an advertising platform within any of these immersive platforms to really advertise on? And even if there were, is it necessarily right to advertise within the immersive environment? Now, Phil, I'm going to start with you because I know you've got some strong views on this. But I am curious to hear from your perspective. Should we be advertising in the platform?
We advertise everywhere else, so I don't see this as being a real problem. I think that the issues are the fact that how are we doing this advertising in the platform? What you've just said, Tanya, is a real proof that the industry doesn't know where it's going in like marketing in some ways, because it has one style for one thing and it has another style for another thing, and sometimes it really takes some marketing genius to do something which is ultra special. I love the fact that a lot of VR marketing is done in 2D. I think that's absolutely classical, almost traditional in its own way of like being like fuddy-duddy and not actually like realizing what it's going to do. But the fundamental things that I feel are to do with the way that it's like handled, the way that it's brought across. So I think that there's a classic South Park episode, Freemium Isn't Free, which talks about how to monetize like games to the nth degree but not make them things, just make them addictive. I think it's dependent on whether you're trying to make the advertising within the product addictive or if you're trying to make the advertising just there. Because if you've seen the latest Blade Runner film, and I'm not going to make any spoilers, unless I'm spoiling you for advertising, there are significant like adverts for like Peugeot and other products within that film.
There's a lot of product placement in that movie. A lot. Yes.
And so I think, product placement is something that like funds a product, but it's the way that it's utilized and whether it's utilized well or whether it's utilized badly, and whether if that is actually starting to affect the player experience.
But then you say that about the Blade Runner, the new Blade Runner movie, and in some ways it's kind of irrelevant because I'm not going to read it for you, Mookie. I'm just saying is in the context of the movie, it's kind of irrelevant because the story and the plot and the environment of that movie makes it a natural thing to expect product placement because of the nature of this kind of cyberpunk, futuristic, Asian influence kind of world. You expect to see lots of advertising flying around. It's like Ghost in the Shell. You expect to see a lot of advertising floating around in that world. So in that respect, it's not a strange thing to expect to see some product placement kind of shoved in your face. Whereas if
But if you think about American Psycho and the absolute impact that book had for his product placement at the time, that's just the 70s. We're only like sort of 40 years on from that, and things have changed quite dramatically, and the way that we deal with this has changed. And I don't think that that's a problem per se. I think it's just a problem as to how it's addressed and where it's addressed. We talked last time about VR and minors and things like this. Is product placement okay there? Isn't it? It's a moral conundrum, but I think there's a whole lot more to this question, which hopefully like Mookie and Alan can deal with.
So here's the thing I want to ask then. I'm pointing this one at you, Alan, which is that it's all well and good to say, there's interesting ways of approaching advertising within the medium, such as product placement, but as Phil rightly points out, a lot of the advertising for VR right now is in 2D. And it's great because you're watching this TV ad and you can see, the PSVR, in 2D, and then it kind of throws you into the world and all the rest of that. But you're still seeing it all in 2D. And one of the things that hasn't been generally acknowledged yet by marketeers in general is the fact that when you are doing a marketing campaign for any immersive entertainment title, you have a certain burden of responsibility to not just advertise the game title or the entertainment title, but also the actual medium and the products and the hardware itself, because you're still in this phase of explaining what the hell it is. And I'm kind of curious from your perspective, how you feel that people can kind of approach that dual task, if you like, of not just advertising a product, but also trying to clarify an understanding of the actual medium. It's like trying to explain what a TV is whilst also trying to advertise a TV program, right?
Yeah, and one of the things I've noticed actually is in the VR industry, it seems like a lot of developers are actually putting the cart before the horse, where you're trying to push a title and you're trying to push whether it be a game or 360 or whatever, and not pushing the equipment to use it. The availability, I just think the availability of the equipment has to come first. In my opinion, they have to be household items. So VR, so however you get it into the household, whether it be through wearables or whether it be through gaming systems, or whether it be through any other means that you get the VR systems into homes, that's what needs to happen first. And if you need to push your title in that direction, then I think everybody has to kind of sit down on, okay, well, what medium do we want to go through? Is it going to be Google? Is it going to be Microsoft? Is it going to be Sony? Is it going to be Oculus? Who's it going to be, and who are we pushing? Because there's going to be a first comer. There's going to be a first comer, and then everybody's going to follow.
So I'm kind of curious, Miki, from your perspective then, in terms of the fact that Alan rightly points out that this isn't really something that's in everybody's home just yet, and it's going to take for there to be a significant shift in attitude towards the hardware to get it into people's homes. And I think, the PSVR has definitely been a bit of a front runner in terms of just making people comfortable and familiar with the fact that it's just a console, it's just an extension to the console, it's okay to have that in your home. But I know that you and we go to a lot of these conferences and we go to a lot of events and things, but I remember having a conversation recently with somebody where it turns out that apparently a lot of mainstream public don't realise that it's all well and good having a HTC Vive or an Oculus Rift headset, but that you actually have to buy a laptop or a computer that can run the damn thing. And there is this actual lack of understanding, like fundamental lack of understanding around what the technological requirement is and how complex that might seem to somebody who isn't really, into all of the technology. They're the, mainstream consumer who just expects to, kind of pick up a TV and put it in their home and it works, and that isn't really the case when it comes to the high end, Oculus or HTC Vives, where you really do need to have a basic understanding of the computing power that's needed and, a good understanding of graphics cards, for example. So from your perspective, what do you see being the approach to, I suppose, educating people on the basics of computing? I don't know if that's even something we want to try and do, but I think it is a fundamental.
Yeah. Oh, well, okay. I think there's a couple different streams that we've got bubbling here. Couple different bubbles that are bubbling here with regard to advertising and marketing in VR. And that's within the content itself, and that's where we were talking about the layering and product integration and product placement. And now this bubble is kind of about the marketing of the actual how-to dummies guide style mixed with that hardware and the tools that go with it. What I found in kind of my own R&D and our own R&D together, and again, like you said, going to these conferences, I think when you're talking about a PlayStation, the Vive, they've catered toward people who are a little bit more familiar with that kind of interactivity. So they have a little bit less education to do. What they should be doing more of is creating very, very, very gentle beginners experiences with your flotation rings around your arms, to metaphorically here. That'd be funny if they did actually make something where you have to wear like those swimming floating rings on your arms. But if they are able to make a little bit more of that actually how-to guides and here's what you do, that would be great. One thing that is changing beginners experiences is, I think, web-based VR and these type of apps that give you an option to look through Magic Window or through a basic cardboard even. That's where I've seen things change so much in the last year and a half, where total beginners are more familiar with the terms, and they have tried it a little bit by holding up their iPad, or they had a free cardboard headset with their Domino's pizza. Then you move up another more like advanced level and intermediate levels where they are looking for a challenge. They expect HTC to do something big. They expect Sony PlayStation to do something completely that's going to blow their mind. And you're like in a little bit more of an elite class. So where is that middle person find their ground? They either hang out with the people that know how to use the PlayStation, and they have their hardware, software, squishyware, whatever equipment that needs to come with it, and then learn from them, because the total beginner are likely not to really necessarily go out and search for it, is what I found from my own experience. So what do those people need to do? I think they need to educate their audiences in a better way that can guide the beginners and find that conversion, because that's what I'm not really seeing. And maybe that's where Alan and Phil could back me up on this. Like, where is that conversion from total virgin, VR virgin, to getting them to be using a little bit more? They don't right now.
Well, that is kind of a fundamental issue right now, is that there is this really compartmentalized approach to VR. It's either you're using a cardboard or a mobile device, you're using a high-end mobile device, or you're using a tethered device. And they're three very different ecosystems right now. There doesn't seem to be a huge amount of transition between them. And what I am curious about, though, because kind of picking up from what you were saying there, Mickey, is this idea that you have a lot of people who are trying cardboard experiences and mobile VR experiences for the first time, where they're doing that whole kind of magic window. So they're not pressing the little cardboard button on YouTube. They're just watching it as a traditional video, and it might be on Facebook as well. So, and they're just able to tilt their phone around or tilt their tablet around, and they can see into this kind of world, and using it as a magic window into that world.
Because most of them don't have the headset. That's why, yeah.
And one of the results of the Dubbit's CVR report, the Children in VR report, was that a lot of children are experiencing VR by watching videos on YouTube and Facebook first that explains or shows other people experiencing VR. And there is this interesting kind of question around why more people aren't using that magic window into a 360 environment as an advertising tool. And I'm kind of curious from your perspective, Alan, in terms of like the different channels of marketing that are available to people, why that isn't kind of an approach that people wouldn't be thinking to take in terms of mobile advertising and pay-per-click advertising on YouTube and Facebook is already a well-established ecosystem. It would stand to reason that it would be logical from an audience development perspective and from a growth hacking perspective that you would target the audience where they are already searching for these YouTube videos and these Facebook videos to expose them to the experience of the magic window. What's your thoughts on that?
I think it's a channel. I think it hasn't matured as a marketing channel amongst marketers, and I think that's where you're seeing it's kind of slow to be used in as an audience development tool. Because I've seen it like pop up in a couple places. Like I've seen like your 360 videos, and I see some people that are using it very effectively. A lot of movies I see are using it. And then I've seen a couple. I've actually seen some products that are using it pretty effectively as well. But it's not. It's just not. I think you need to have a very tech savvy. I think you need to have a very, just like you guys were all speaking about the VR virgins of the world. I think a lot of marketers right now are VR virgins as well. And I think that they don't even think of that as a plausible channel right now for them. Or if they do, they don't know how to use it in their industry, whatever that industry may be.
It's interesting, though, because what you're talking about there is the difference between experiences, and in terms of you're seeing some people who are using 360 video smartly and interestingly. But what I'm talking about is actually utilizing 360 video as the advertising campaign itself. And I don't see many people doing that at the moment. And from your perspective, is this because, as you say, that there are a lot of marketers out there who are probably VR virgins?
Yeah, I think very much so. I don't even think they know a lot of people know what a 360 camera is in the marketing world. So to be able to put together a 360 video for any reason, I think it sits outside of their realm of, not possibility, but I think it sits outside of their realm of knowledge right now. Like it may be like a shadow of it in their mind. They might know about it, but not enough to actually actively pursue a marketing campaign of that nature.
Average marketer like that, like what you were saying, Alan, and then what you're finding is, again, what we've seen so many times is there are marketing people that want to get involved and take a chance. So they'll throw buttloads of money into a production to say that they've done it. But then there's that argument, are they doing it right? And is it good quality content? A lot of it is. And then some of it is like, why are you doing this? Save your money. And I've talked myself out of work by going, you don't need to do this right now. Get your ideas right. Why are you doing this? And then there's other reasons that are very valid, like your whiskey tasting kind of things, where you're incorporating the smell and the taste. And they do it to road shows, to like, whiskey conventions and things like that. And in airports where you're wearing the headset and then you're smelling the whiskey in your taste, then that's applicable in a marketing perspective. And it is in context as well.
It's interesting that you're saying this though, Mookie, because here's one of the things that I do find really interesting is that difference between the physical embodiment of the advertising being in a context of an event or a conference or an expo of some sort, and having that person on standby to, whip off the headset and then start explaining to you what you've just experienced, or actually them bringing the brand together with that person who's just put the headset on their head. I think that it's interesting because it reminds me of one of the early conferences I went to, or early talks I went to, and the person who was talking was explaining about their 360 film, and at the time they had some headsets on either side of the stage, and they were asking people to come down from the audience and try the headsets whilst they were having their on-stage conversation. And then as people came down and tried on these headsets, they actually stopped the conversation on the panel to kind of go, hold on a minute, no, you need to be standing, and you need to have the headphones need to be the other way around, and you've got to do the thing this way. And I just remember sitting there and thinking, good Lord, if you have to sit there and explain it to every single person who's putting a headset on their head, this is never going to be something that is in everybody's home, because you can't be there in everybody's home explaining this stuff to them. And what you're explaining right there, or what you're kind of talking about right there, is very, very similar in as much as from a marketing and advertising perspective, you need somebody there to explain that stuff to them as they experience it at the expo. So yes, they might be, doing a whiskey tasting and smelling the whiskey and, wandering around inside the VR world. But once they whip that headset off, they still need somebody from the whiskey brand to kind of say to them, hey, you've just experienced this thing, and here's our brand, and here's where you can buy it. And
exactly. So there's two different things. So like the whiskey thing was at an actual whiskey exhibition and at an airport where they are with the whiskey experts. Then the second part is that VR conference or whatever, the tech conference, where it is the producer not really knowing the product. And they should be hunted down and trampled on.
Okay.
No, I completely agree. I mean, that's pre-planning 101. It's just like, if you haven't tested out
what be there.
Yeah, exactly. But to test out the what you're going to do at the show and then see what the problems are, you should not be doing that. It's so unprofessional. It looks idiotic.
But Phil, I'm kind of curious from your perspective, in as much as, Miki mentioned this thing about brands who are kind of throwing a lot of money at this and spending a lot of money, but they don't necessarily understand why. And one of the things that I know that I say an awful lot when I'm speaking at conferences is, that phrase, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And we talk about this kind of notion that VR advertising is kind of in that early phase of mobile advertising, where everybody wanted a mobile app, everybody wanted a mobile game or a mobile ready website, mobile first, it was the thing. Everybody's talking about mobile first. And when you said to them, why, people would look at you very blankly and kind of go, but it's the thing. Everybody's doing it. I should be doing it. It's like, yeah, but just because everybody's doing it, is it really the best thing? Does it make it better by having it as a mobile app? And I think it's kind of the same thing with VR, in as much as, that the questions that agencies should be asking and that studios should be asking is, is there a valid reason why this needs to be in VR? And I give an example here. I'm not going to name names. I'm trying to avoid naming any names in all my examples today. But there was an example of somebody who showed me an experience of a fashion show. This was a while ago now. And this fashion show had been shot in 360. It was a catwalk show, and it was a broader documentary piece. So there was some other interesting pieces. But the specific bit, I remember kind of sitting there looking at it and just kind of going, why did you do this in 360? Because having a 360 camera kind of floating over the top of the head of the models as they walk up and down the catwalk, it doesn't really add anything to this, because I don't want to see their perspective. I want to see what they're wearing, because the whole point is it's a fashion show and it's about their clothes and what they're wearing. So actually, there's no valid reason why you should have done this in 360. It would have actually been more effective in good old traditional 2D, because then I can actually see what they're wearing and see the fashion up close. And I just remember thinking, why did you do this? And I'm curious, Phil, from your perspective, when you speak to people, these brands or other game studios who are thinking about doing stuff and ready to invest quite a lot of money, let's be honest, in doing these things. What the kind of the core reasoning behind this needs to be, or what your thoughts and opinions are on this? Because I know you have thoughts and opinions, Phil.
Well, I mean, the fashion show are idiots, but let's just move on from that. If we look at, I think this is something that Mookie and Alan will just understand. I love the idea of like marketers as like virgins. That's quite amusing. But these sort of, I remember some of the early mobile adverts. You were in the middle of like sort of Antiques Roadshow, and then there'd be an advert for a mobile game, and it's just like, this is the wrong place to place this type of advert on TV. You want to be placing it in like the right time frame, whether you're hitting the right people who are like sitting there watching that and using their mobile phones, and then go, oh, maybe I'll download the app. And it's a lack of forethought which usually causes most of these things. I remember the terrible cinema adverts, thank God that they've stopped, where they didn't really show anything of the film, but they just showed clips of people coming out of the film and saying how good it was. Not that I really cared about their view. And I really, really can see VR, like somebody in marketing in VR going, oh, that's a really good idea. That'll go for miles, and it won't.
It wasn't Blade Runner, was it, Phil?
No. It wasn't. And then I think the other problem at the moment, and I'm just sort of tracking back on some of the other things, is that with AR and VR having different providers, we're heading towards this Betamax VHS like fight, which needs to be sorted out really, really quickly. And finally, we do not have, no, this is not actually finally, we do not have accessibility to the units, as has already been said, but we don't have accessibility like we did with the Wii, where suddenly Granny was playing video games with the Wii. So we need a headset, or we need something that is as equivalent to the Wii, that you just put it on, you don't need anything else, and you can just get up and go, and that adds you to the experience, and therefore you understand what the experience is going on. And also the marketing is really, really poor, and I'm not criticizing anybody here who's involved in marketing. I'm just, because I think that they really, really are in the know. But why use 360-degree video, as you said, for certain purposes? Why not to do something very, very subtle with it, like do a video hunt with it? So you release a number of 360 videos, and each of them points to the next video. So then you go and find the next video and keep on this hunt. And the first person to
watch as a sudden explosion of these kind of campaigns emerge.
Yes. It's okay, you're getting this one for free. It's not my best idea. So the real problem here is is exactly what we've been talking about, is how do you get that sort of general thing? And the way that you get this general thing, the way that you get this general feeling, is accessibility of the units, so that it feels free and that everybody can do it. This is one of the reasons I think AR will cause VR's revolution, basically, because I think with AR glasses, which I think will become very, very commonplace in the next 2-3 years, that you can advertise VR experiences on AR glasses. I appreciate the processing power would take longer and things like this, but you can do that. So you can give them a snippet of this thing. So when they're at home, it's just have a 5-second advert for this VR experience, and then you see the VR experience, and even you can support that with product placement within that VR experience, so that you're killing two birds with one stone.
So this is where marketing is going to ruin everything, because and I say that because I'm part of the evil empire. Because in the AR reality, I honestly believe it's funny, because as soon as people if they become the norm and enough people are walking around with an AR headset on, or AR sunglasses, or whatever glasses, once people get a hold of that, I'm going to have an advertisement right outside my store. I'm going to be walking down New York City, and every single building I walk past, something's going to pop up in front of me saying, hey, try this pizza, or try this sushi, or try this whatever tacos, or we have sushi burritos now and whatever. And I just really, I really think I'm honestly afraid it'll become more of a nuisance than it will be helpful in the industry. I don't know. I don't know for sure. I just know that this is where marketing people, if it becomes the norm, they will take full advantage of it because they'll just want to.
But Alan, that means that we can introduce a whole new set of laws which don't actually really cover the concept, but try and cover the concept and cause even more irrational decisions on the street.
Oh God! But you know what? So there's a couple of points I want to follow up on in terms of what Phil just said. So first of all, I want to just kind of point out that with the Wii, that the significant difference with the Wii is that people could just pick up the controllers and wave them around. And there wasn't this need to be fundamentally a gamer who understood traditional game locomotion with a proper console. And that's kind of the issue with VR, in as much as there are two different types of people who try to experience VR. There are those people who are gamers or understand gaming, who when you put a controller in their hand, understand locomotion. They understand the X button and they understand, the little cross and why they should push it and all the rest of that stuff and what it should do and how it should respond. And then you have the flip end of that, which is the people who are not gamers, who do not understand game locomotion, who expect to be able to put on a VR headset or a mixed reality headset or an AR headset for that matter, and just be able to reach out and interact with things. And if they try to pick up a glass, they expect it to be able to just, suddenly appear in their hand and now they've got hold of it. And that's the issue right now is that the way that a lot of these experiences are being developed is not in that mainstream friendly way. It is with the assumption that you understand basic game locomotion and the mechanics of how to interact with a game environment. So I think that there is that issue that needs to be overcome first, just kind of in response to the Wii comment. But then also the other thing I want to kind of pick up on as well is this notion of using the advertising in the right context. And I wanted to bring this back to, because you're talking about AR, and I did actually want to bring this back to early AR advertising, which I don't know if anybody remembers this or not, but there used to be this whole fad around AR markers and QR codes. You remember when QR codes was the thing? And everybody wanted to put a QR code on their advertising for no good reason. And I remember the two most stupid examples that I saw where it's clear that the marketeers had not thought it through. One was an example on the Underground, the Tube in London. This was before they had Wi-Fi in the Tube stations, so you couldn't get an internet signal no matter what you did, and you certainly couldn't get a mobile phone signal down there. And there was an advert on the Tube train with a QR code that required you to scan the QR code, but you couldn't get a phone signal, so you couldn't actually find out what the thing was that you just scanned. So it's like clearly not thinking this through. And then the second example of this was on a big billboard where somebody had put an AR game onto a QR code. So you scan the QR code on the billboard and then it would pop up a game that was an AR game. It kind of mixed a bit of reality with, a layered interface. I'm not going to say which brand it was. But there's this whole thing of, yes, I can understand that you would put this on a bus stop, when people are waiting for a bus, but actually on a billboard next to a motorway is not a logical place to put this advertising, because you're literally asking people to hold up their phone and play a game whilst in motion. It's like
sounds like a stupid person that did that.
I'm just
it's people not thinking through their marketing. I had one just the other day pop up. It was a QR code. It was a mobile ad, and it said scan the code for a 10% discount. And I'm thinking to myself, the device that I would use to scan this code is the device that you're putting the code. I literally physically can't do it. So
that's the problem, is people aren't thinking this stuff through. And when it comes to VR, I think there is this fundamental lack of understanding when people are trying to advertise VR content or certainly immersive entertainment content. They're not thinking it through. And certainly I wonder whether or not there is more education that needs to happen, but also, how do we step past this whole kind of, marketeers as VR virgins thing and into a scenario where it becomes part of the marketing mix. It's not something that they're doing for the sake of doing it. It's not something that they're doing it because it's special or it's a thing that has to stand on its own 2 feet as an isolated channel, but as part of a spectrum of activity. How do we begin to get to that stage? Phil, any thoughts on this? In terms
probably.
of how do we get people past that initial hump of being a VR virgin but needing to utilize the tool, and how do we get them to a point where they're beginning to see VR or VR channels as part of a spectrum of marketing rather than as a standalone isolated thing?
Okay, so I do a little bit of marketing, and I've done marketing in the past, and I do know a rather large marketing firm who were trying to overcome this barrier, and I did turn around to them and say, have any of your marketing stuff actually used VR? And they said no. So that might be the initial barrier, that they haven't actually tried it. So that's one of those things. I think one of the things Mookie said earlier was these really, really instantly lovable, safe environments to play about with, things to do. So putting on the water wings and then just going off and knowing that you're going to be completely safe, and that the 1980s films things, you're not going to slip into this other reality because it's full of something cute and something really, really enjoyable. And actually, without wanting to advertise in that market, I think that children are the access to get the parents involved. And if you get the children involved in something very, very lightweight, the parents will probably get involved, especially if it's educational. And there's a really, really fundamental thing here. Educational games tend to be really, really worthy. The best educational games I've ever found are the ones which were never educational games. And I've turned around to that studio person and gone, what an amazing educational game you've created. And they have have we? Which is really, really nice because they've done it without thinking. And if you can create those experiences in VR, which are educational, they involve parents and children, you make it super cheap. So it's a cardboard thing so that the parents and kids can do this thing together, this activity together. Then you suddenly create this, this gentle, sort of beckoning in of using the facilities and using the processors and stuff like this. Obviously, you have to take into account the fact that the eyes in a child are still growing, and that you don't want to do this. So they have to be short experiences. But realistically, you don't want to put a child in a sort of complex, mathematical nightmare to try and educate them. You want them something where they can pull something from different elements of the walls and put them together and things like this. And then if the parents sort of does something as well, then they can move on to the next stage. It's this sort of interactivity where you still keep that group momentum going, but you create it in a more localized setting, and you create it in a fantasy setting, which is exciting and engaging.
I'm so glad that you didn't use the word gamification or gamify right there.
No, they're illegal words in my.
But thank you so much, Phil. I appreciate that.
Tanya, it's a difference of there could be a whole podcast to talk about marketing for brands. There could be a whole podcast talk about gaming. There could be one to talk about broadcasters, how different people do it, because they're all different projects with different audiences. So your gaming campaign will be so different from a TV show.
But you say that, but at the same time, the fundamental tools are no different. So Alan, for example, as a marketeer, it wouldn't really matter what the product is or what type of product this is. From his perspective as a marketeer, when he's putting together a campaign, he's looking at all of the marketing channels as tools, as options of how he's going to communicate and articulate that brand or that product, irrespective of what SKU it is.
No, I agree.
Yes. And defining the audience ahead of time as well.
Exactly.
Think about that from a TV show as well, or a record label, or an album I'm working with, or artists. Because you do have to think about all those channels. I agree 1,000,000%. But I would treat each campaign in a different way, though.
But that's absolutely normal, though.
Because they're still different. And it's a different your next Tomb Raider thing is going to be different from a Saturday night family entertainment show. Basic approaches in the marketing, of course. And you do have to think cross-platform. You have to think about all these different levels and things like that. But I'm just saying, all I'm saying is that there's lots of things to be thinking about. And does it boil down to the responsibility of the software hardware creators to also be educating the audiences, from going back to the original topic of the beginning of this podcast? Yes, I think so. That makes our jobs a little bit easier, I think.
I hear what you're saying, but here's my thing, and I bear with me on this, because I feel quite strongly on this. So I understand where you're coming from, but at the same time, the fundamental tools in the toolkit of a marketeer are still the same, irrespective of whether you're advertising a car, a mobile game, a food brand, a luxury brand, whatever the thing is. You start out with the same basic principles. And Alan, I'm sure that you can back me up on this. In as much as you're gonna start out with basics, you're gonna find out who your audience is, where they live, what they do. You're gonna profile your audience. You're gonna understand how to get those eyeballs and what volume of eyeballs you need in order to be able to convert those eyeballs into actually, paying customers. And, Alan mentioned earlier about lead generation. This is the fundamentals that all marketeers should be operating to. And so I wonder if perhaps the difference here is more about the quality of the marketeer and the type of marketing they're doing versus necessarily an understanding of the technology. So Alan, I'm kind of curious to hear your thoughts on this.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to add quickly, my thoughts on that, because when Phil said that he knows people at a very large marketing firm, and he asked them, how many of these are you doing? And they said none. That's disappointing. That's absolutely disappointing. So it's going to take that person, because again, those tools are there. Everybody knows what you're doing. It's just putting it into a different medium. It's a new platform. It's a new marketing channel, and somebody needs to explore it. So once there's going to be, there's a vacuum right now. For that kind of marketing, for that kind of advertising, for whatever. And I think somebody's going to fill that vacuum eventually. I just don't know if it's going to be the VR industry or if it's going to be the marketing industry, like a marketing firm.
But I think this is really interesting, because you're talking about this vacuum, and the thing is that there are a few different people right now who are building platforms specifically designed for advertising in VR, and yet I feel like they are kind of missing the point. In as much as it's all well and good to advertise within the actual hardware, within the headset, when you're in the immersive experience, to have an advert thrown at you or to have product placement thrown at you is all well and good, but it doesn't address the fundamental issue of actually being able to understand where VR sits in the broader spectrum of an actual marketing and advertising campaign. When you're sitting down and you're putting together, a targeted campaign, you're doing some pay-per-click, and you're doing, your mobile advertising, and you're doing TV advertising and print advertising and all that other good stuff that you do. There needs to be a line in that is immersive, whether that's true VR content or 360 content, whatever the thing is. But that is the kind of educational piece that needs to happen. I'm kind of curious from your perspective, Alan, whether or not you think that perhaps this is more about educating marketeers in terms of that fundamental basic of, look, we need to understand who this audience is, who has access to the hardware and the software, how they behave, what their behaviors are, and therefore how we reach them and connect with them utilizing these channels, versus this whole thing of let's create a marketing platform that exists within the ecosystem, and let's shove marketing at people, advertising in people's faces. Do
you think, though, that somebody would genuinely be thinking about that, though, before they actually produce something?
But here's my thing,
right? But it's not happening.
But here's the thing, Mookie, is like when somebody produces a movie or creates a game, there is a marketing team somewhere in the building that is thinking about how the hell do I advertise this game? I've got to have enough eyeballs to be able to convert those eyeballs into people who are willing to pay and therefore make money and revenue and profit. And that's what we call a basic, forecast. We, in the games industry, we have to put together a forecast in order to understand actually, what is our cost per acquisition? What is our cost per install? What is our average payment per paying user? These are the basic fundamentals of marketing.
Yeah, I agree. So is the question, are they just thinking it's just a bolt-on, or are they treating this as a standalone marketing format?
I think the answer to that is I don't think they know yet.
Exactly.
So again, I want to go back to the naivety of the marketing world. I don't think they know yet, and I don't think they know how to use it yet. Like I could sit here and think to myself of a million ways, and this is, we've had, Tanya and I have had conversations, where a million ways where you could use a VR experience as a marketing platform for anything that would actually be very immersive and would actually, like, for a brand, would be fantastic. And I don't know if I saw this somewhere or if I'm just making this up, but I can imagine being in a VR environment, right? And you break away from your whatever it is that you're doing. Maybe it's television, maybe it's music, maybe it's whatever that experience is. You break away and you're on a beach, and you can look around and you're on a beach and you look down to your right hand side and there's a bucket full of Coronas. So like something like that. I could just, you're immersing somebody into the situation, and you're getting like like I said, I don't know if I saw that. If I just made that up, Corona, call me.
And where's this beach?
What you're doing is you're making the person feel exactly what Corona wants you to feel. So from a marketing, and that's where whether it be a product or a movie or a game or another VR experience, that's where marketers, I don't think, are thinking. They're not thinking, how do I connect my audience? How do I connect them to this?
But also, how do you convert them? Because isn't that the fundamentals of what we do on a day-to-day basis from a marketing perspective, Alan? In that, when we set up these campaigns, it's not just about throwing out some kind of content at people. It's about actually converting that person into a paying customer, right? It's about creating that lead and saying, okay, now that person has exposure to the brand, we're going to give them a pathway to actually payment and revenue and creating a monetization option for them to be able to pay for the product or pay for the brand. And the thing is that right now, anybody who's using VR as a marketing tool, it's more about just kind of articulating the experience than necessarily talking about, okay, now that I've shown you this thing or immersed you in this thing or made you love the brand or whatever that VR experience has done, the next logical step is to then say, and you can buy it here. Or, and this is where you go to get, the next thing or whatever the thing is. It's that whole thing of forgetting the reason why you advertise in the first place. My point, and again, I'm throwing this back to you, Alan, because I think it is fundamentally a marketing question, which is, my point is that people who are utilizing the channel of VR, whether it's 360 films or actually within a headset, advertising something, whatever that thing is, whether it's a car brand or an actual game or an actual movie, fundamentally, there is not a call to action at the end of these experiences. At the end of that 360 film or the end of that VR experience, there is not a call to action to say, and this is how you now pay for this thing. And I'm curious from your perspective, Alan, from a marketing perspective, whether or not we would see that as an epic fail.
No, I don't think so. Because first of all, it depends on what the nature of your advertising is. If it's a branding thing, then great. But if you are looking for that call to action, I think the technology. I honestly believe the technology will catch up. To a point where you'll be able to have that call to action. Probably in an AR or VR environment as well. Don't forget, like, if via your device, our devices are all connected. Like it's connected to everything. So if I have a headset on and I have my phone connected, well, my phone's also connected to my bank account and my cards, and it's also connected to my Amazon account. And I see, so if I'm in a VR AR environment and I see an advertisement, or even if I'm being remarketed to via Amazon, there is the possibility of kind of reaching out, and I guess it would require a handset as well or whatever. But in saying, or even voice recognition and saying yes, or click this or something, I think that's going to be possible if it's not already.
So I'm curious then, Phil, from your perspective in all of this. Obviously, I'm kind of ranting. I'm pushing a point hard here because I do think that there is this right now. There is a lack of logical application for utilizing VR or 360 advertising. And I'm curious from your perspective, because obviously in the games industry, one of the first questions that I will always ask a game studio when I walk in the door is going to be, show me your forecast. And the amount of studios who look at you and kind of go, and you're like, hold on a minute, how are you keeping the lights on? If you haven't thought about this, how are you going to keep the lights on? I'm just kind of curious, Phil, from your perspective, whether or not you think that there is this lack of foresight, this lack of commercial viability and commercial consideration when it comes to the way that people are wanting to utilize these immersive formats for advertising.
And no, I think it's a lack of ingenuity. I think that much like Hollywood, a large part of the marketing industry has moved into ultra safe mode. So that's why every car advert is exactly a blueprint of the other one. And most advertising is just blueprints. And people need to start breaking the walls to actually start doing proper marketing advertising campaigns again. They need to do clever things. They need to use their ingenuity. There are companies out there who do this and they do it really, really well. But they're not the ones who are being targeted with big VR products, because these big VR products are going through mainstream marketing companies who just feel that they can do it safe. I've seen marketing in some VR products and it's almost like going back to the 70s marketing. It's just my God, people, have you not learned anything? Have you not experienced what you're actually putting into this thing? And it's a lack of absolute knowledge. It's this fear of trying something new in a new environment. I mean, this is a new environment and there's a fear of trying something new. And they really need to kick themselves up the arse and get out there and try some new things. Because if they keep going with the same old traditional things, they are going to get nothing out of it. Absolutely nothing. And that is going to be the mainstay of those companies. I'm saying, the company's good at doing X, Y, Z advertising and they don't understand VR, then don't try and branch into VR until you get experts in that field coming in and being able to explain it, or until all your team go on an excursion for a half a day with a VR headset and learn what they're actually trying to advertise in. Because otherwise this lack of understanding is abusive to the actual medium, which I think is quite a brilliant medium.
I love that statement, abusive to the medium. But okay, so basically they need to hire Alan, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Right.
Well, what? I'm going to be honest with you. It goes back to Tanya. You were just talking about how every marketer has their tool set. They have their basic tool set, and you think about it, and that's absolutely 100% true. But maybe in a lot of cases, it's a vice as well. Maybe they just have this old way of doing things, and they're not thinking outside of the box. They're just thinking, this is how we do it for every industry, for every for every product, for every
checklisting
market.
It.
Yeah, and they're just checklisting it, and that's why it's coming off as dull or as 70s style advertising.
Okay, here's my thing now, is what I will say is this, that at the moment, I think we've identified a couple of key issues here. The first being a fundamental lack of understanding of the technology and the medium. And as Phil rightly points out, there's a lot of marketers who don't even actually physically try the hardware. And as Alan rightly points out, there's a lot of VR virgins in the marketing world. And, this reminds me of an issue I had when I was, working with a lot of MMO studios, and I would start, working with the studio, and the first thing I would ask the commercial team is, have you played the product? They're trying to advertise this game to people, to get people to play this game. And my first question was, have you played the product? And the commercial team invariably would say no. And it was one of those things that it's okay, well, sit down and play the product, because if you don't understand what the customer is going to experience, if you don't understand what you're trying to get them to do, then how can you advertise this product? And I kind of feel the same way about VR, which is if you're trying to get people to put a headset on their head, how can you genuinely get people excited about that if you don't understand what it's like to be inside a headset? And so I'm going to ask you all to give me one action that you think that we could give to the marketing industry as a next step action that they could do that would help to facilitate that fundamental understanding that needs to occur, what do you think is one thing that they could do? And I'm going to start with you, Mookie.
Listen to this podcast.
Okay, listen to the rant. All right, then.
You know what? We had some good advice here. And ultimately, what's the one thing marketers could do is really think carefully why they want to be doing it. Where is it going? Who is it for? Who is it for, number one? And how are they gonna let people know how to get the best experience out of it? And then come and talk to us.
Okay. Phil, what's your thoughts on this?
I'm really impressed that Mookie's managed to break the fourth wall within a podcast.
I break a lot of things, honey. Don't worry.
Yeah, that's cool. I think that they should all go off to a museum and walk around and find what's attractive about a 3D environment. And then go back and think about how they're marketing.
Okay.
Because I think the problem is the lack of awareness of everything, and they should look at everything, not just the displays, but how the lighting is, how everything's there. Go to really, really old buildings and see how the beautiful light roofs, like the Scottish Museum in Edinburgh, how the roof just like reflects the light and fills the room with like energy and things like this. Because if you understand that, if you understand the 3D environment rather than this flat 2D environment with 3D figures in it, then you start to understand what you should be advertising and what you should be marketing.
Okay, good advice. Alan, as the resident marketeer in this conversation, what is your advice?
I mean, my advice to marketers would be to, not stop what you've always been doing. Like we've grown as marketers. We've grown from the print age to the digital age to the mobile age. Let's not forget that as a marketer, we've always been required to grow with the industries and with the platforms around us. And there's a new platform around us, and we need to be able to know what we're doing and grow with it.
Okay. Well, as always, thank you very much for joining us. And we like to give our listeners a way to be able to find out a little bit more about you and what you're up to. And we ask you to do that by sharing with us your social media handle of choice. What would that be, Mookie?
You can find me at Mookie Approve on everything, but mostly Twitter. Come talk to me.
Wonderful. And Phil?
I am at Philip G. Harris on Twitter, and if you add me, I will add you back as long as you don't look like a bot.
And Alan, what about you, good stuff?
I'm not putting out my Twitter because it's vulgar. But you can find me on LinkedIn. It's in/Alan Sott. It's 1L SOTT.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for listening. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to subscribe and review, and follow us on Twitter at Digital Jam Ltd. Thinking of starting your own podcast? Why not speak to the GL Pro UK team? They handle all of our podcasting service needs. Tell them that Digital Jam Session sent you, and you'll get 10% off your first order. Find out more at www.glpro.co.uk. digitaljamsessions.com